The lunch line at Taeyong High moves at 4 people per minute. And by the time I get my tray, I already know what the kitchen took in that day. 214 paid lunches, 11 staff meals free, 6 kids on the fee waiver, of which one is me, which the register announces with a different beep, a higher one, so you can hear a poor kid coming from across the hall. Total that Friday, 1,406,001, minus the 8 refunds Mrs. Yang punched in wrong on Tuesday and never fixed. I didn't count it. Counting takes effort. This is more like reading a sign. My mother works the second station, the soup one. She never looks up when I pass. That was her idea, not mine, and she explained it once, 4 years ago, in the tone people use for weather. It's easier for both of us. So I take my tray past her hands and her hairnet and the ladle going up and down, and I sit at the end of the third table, where the bench is bolted a little crooked and nobody fights me for it. Fridays, we do the check. Cho Hanoel comes in at 12:20 with 3 people behind him, which is his whole personality expressed as a formation. He sets my math test on the table in front of me. Red pen out of his blazer pocket. The good kind, the one his father buys in packs of 10. Read it, he says. So I read it, out loud from the top, so the tables around us can follow along. Question 1, answer. Question 2, answer. He goes down the page with the red pen and stops on number 7, which is correct, and crosses it out, and writes his own number over it, which is wrong. That's wrong, he says. Thank you for correcting me. Number 13, also correct, also crossed out. Thank you for correcting me. Number 19, the last one, the one worth the most points. He takes his time with that one. He holds the pen above the page and lets everyone get bored first, because the boredom is the part he likes, and then he draws the line. Thank you for correcting me. 3, always 3. Not 2, because 2 doesn't move the rank enough, and not 4, because 4 makes teachers ask questions. 3 keeps me at number 2 in the year with a gap that looks natural, and it keeps him at number 1, and it has kept us both there since the spring of my first year. Somebody at the next table laughed at the third one. New kid, transferred in October, still learning the room. His friend elbowed him quiet. The joke stopped being funny about 2 years ago. Now it's just the schedule. Hanoel folded my test in half and put it in his bag, which he does not have to do since it's my test. He does it anyway. You're getting slower, he said. Yes, say it properly. I'm getting slower. Sorry. He tapped the table twice with a pen and left, and the formation went with him, and I ate my rice. Here's the thing about the number 7 problem. It was a cone volume question, and there was a faster way to do it than the one on the answer sheet. And I used the faster way, and that's what got it flagged. Hanoel can't cross out an answer he doesn't understand. He can only cross out ones he does. So when I want to keep an answer, I write it in a way he can't read, and he leaves it alone. And later he asks me what it means, and I say, I made a mistake and got lucky. That's the whole trick. That's 4 years of me. At 2:40, the vice principal's office called down for me, which the intercom does by room number and not by name. And everyone knows what room 302 means anyway. Cho Gansuk has a nameplate on his desk facing outward toward the visitor, in case the visitor forgets who he is during the meeting. He was doing something with a folder when I came in, and he kept doing it for a while so I could stand there. Regionals in 3 weeks, he said. Yes, sir. The practice set is on the chair. It was a fat one. 40 problems, the kind the province writes when it wants to look serious. Wednesday, he said. Wednesday's short. There's the assembly. He stopped what he was doing with the folder then and looked up, and he smiled, which is the part I hate, because he does it with the whole face and it's warm and it works on parents. Your mother's shift schedule for next month goes up Monday, he said. Nothing unusual in it. Same as always. Wednesday's fine. That's what I thought. He went back to the folder. Close the door properly, it sticks. I took the set and closed the door properly and stood in the hallway outside room 302, which smells like floor wax and the inside of a printer, and I did the first 8 problems in my head before I got to the stairs because I can't help it. It happens the way a song happens when someone says the first line. The stairs are where I put it away. Ground floor, I'm slow again. We live on the 3rd floor of a building in Ansandong that the landlord calls a villa, and everyone else calls the brick one by the laundromat. 2 rooms. The wall between them is thin enough that I know when my father has finished a bottle by the sound it makes going down on the table. He was up when I got in. Company had come, which happens maybe twice a year. Mr. Ryu from the warehouse and Mr. Ryu's wife, and a box of pears on the floor because the table was busy. There he is, my father said. The scholar. Mr. Ryu laughed the way you laugh at a man's joke in his own house. Come here, come here. My father pulled a fold of bills out of his shirt pocket and dropped it on the table and some coins with it. Ryu paid me back. Count it. I looked at it. 47,301, 3 10,000s, 3 5s, 2,000s, and the change was 2 500s, 300s, 47,300. Count it, he said, with your hands like a person. So I picked it up and moved the bills one at a time, from one side of the table to the other, and said the numbers out loud, slowly, and got to the same answer 11 seconds later. And Mr. Ryu's wife looked at the wall the whole time, at the frame my mother hung there in September. It's a newspaper clipping, cut out and put behind glass like a diploma. Regional Mathematics Olympiad, gold, first place. Cho Hanale, second year, Taeyong High School. The photo has him holding the certificate at chest height with both hands, which is the pose they teach you. My mother put it up so I'd have something to look at. 47.3, I said again. See, my father said to Mr. Ryu. Takes him a minute, but he gets there. Later, when they'd gone and my mother was washing the pear plates, she said, without turning around, that Vice Principal Cho had called her at work to say I was doing well. That he said I was helpful, that she should tell me she was proud. He said helpful? He said helpful. I said thank you, and went to my room and did 19 of the 40 problems before midnight. Not because they were hard, because I kept stopping. I should say how I got into that school, since it explains why the arrangement worked on a 13-year-old. Taeyong takes 40 places a year on academic entry and 8 on the district scholarship. And the scholarship covers fees, uniform, and lunches, and is reviewed annually by a committee chaired by the vice principal. My mother had worked in the kitchen for 11 years by then, and everyone told her the same thing, which is that staff children get a fair look. I sat the entrance exam in a hall with 200 kids in it and finished 90 minutes early, and then sat there, because they don't let you leave, and I read the wall. They gave me the top score in the district that year. I know that now. I did not know it then, because the letter said only that I had been awarded a scholarship place. And my mother cried in the corridor outside the kitchens, and my father, who was still going to work every day without the bottle in those years, bought a cake from the bakery under the flyover and ate none of it. 3 weeks into my first term, Okay, who taught the second-year set and has since retired, gave the class a problem he'd got from somewhere and said whoever solved it could go to lunch early. I gave it to him in 4 minutes, and he checked it twice and looked at me over his glasses and said, "Who taught you that?" Nobody had taught me anything. That's the whole of it. We didn't have an academy. We had a kitchen table and a 401 pad, and I'd been doing this since I was 6, the way other kids draw. Mr. OK told the year head. The year head told room 302. I was called up on a Thursday, and I want to describe exactly how it was done, because when people imagine a boy being pressed into 4 years of this, they imagine shouting. Joe Gansok made me tea. He asked about my mother's knees, which are bad, and he knew they were bad. And he asked whether the scholarship was covering the winter uniform properly because the coat allowance had been cut that year, and he'd been fighting it. Then he said there was a boy in the year above who was very nearly excellent and who needed pushing, and that the school's results carried the whole scholarship program because the foundation looked at the competition record when it set the budget. He said, 8 places, 8 families. Then he gave me the worksheets and said at the door, with his hand on my shoulder for the first time, "You'll be helping more people than you know." And I went home and did them at the kitchen table and felt useful. That's the recruitment. Tea, a coat allowance, and a sentence about 8 families. It took 11 minutes. And by the time it was finished, I'd have been embarrassed to say no. And he knew that when he put the kettle on. The threat came later. The threat only came out in the second year, when the worksheets had become papers, and I asked once, whether I could stop for the exam term. That was the first time he showed me the schedule. By then, I'd already done 100 and something worksheets, and the only argument I had against carrying on was that I was tired, and the argument on the other side was a sheet of A4 on a corkboard with my mother's name on it in 11-point type. My mother has worked in that kitchen for 15 years. She started when the building had a different name over the gate, before the foundation money, back when the school was a place you went to because it was near your house. She knows which of the ovens runs hot. She knows the name of every kid who can't have eggs. She is on the schedule as kitchen assistant, second station, and the schedule is a piece of A4 paper that goes up on the corkboard outside the staff room on the first Monday of the month, and the person who prints it is the vice principal's secretary, and the person who tells the secretary what to print is the vice principal. That's the whole machine. That's it. People imagine something more complicated, some contract, some threat with a face on it. It's a sheet of paper on a corkboard. The first time it happened, I was 13, and I didn't understand what was being said to me. He called me in and asked whether I'd ever considered how many people apply for kitchen work in this district. I said no. He said, take a guess. I said I didn't know. He said, guess anyway. You're supposed to be good with numbers. Then he gave me a stack of worksheets with Cho Hanul's name printed on the top of each one. I want to be honest about something, since this is my account of it and I'd rather say it myself than have someone else say it for me. I didn't fight. Not for one day. Not for one worksheet. A braver kid would have walked out of room 302 and gone straight to a teacher and burned the whole thing down at 13. And I have thought about that kid a lot. And I don't like him because he doesn't exist, and I have to live with the one who does. I did the worksheets. They were easy. That was the ugly part. They were easy, and doing them cost me an hour. And an hour is cheap, and my mother kept her hours, and everybody stayed exactly where they were. The math of it worked. It kept working for 4 years, which is how you end up somewhere you would never have agreed to go if someone had described it to you first. Ms. Bay caught the handwriting in November. She teaches the first years now, the ones who still count on their fingers, in the annex behind the gym where they keep the broken chairs. That wasn't always her job. She used to have the third-year classroom with the good windows, and she used to run the math club. And there's a photo in the corridor by the trophy case where she's standing behind 6 kids in matching jackets and one of them is holding a plaque. She stopped me by the stairwell with a paper in her hand. "This is Cho Hanul's regional practice," she said. "Question 31. Explain to me what happens in the third line." "I don't know, ma'am. I'm not in the advanced set." "Explain the third line. I'd have to look at it properly." "Look at it properly, then." I didn't take the paper. I looked at the wall behind her ear, at the fire evacuation map with the little green man running, and I stood there long enough that a first year came down the stairs and went back up them. "You write your 7s with a bar through them," she said. "Nobody in this school writes their 7s with a bar through them. I've marked 200 papers a month for 11 years. Lots of people do that. Name one." The bell went. "I have never been so glad to hear that thing. I filed a report about this in your first year," she said, quieter, because 2 girls were coming down. "Before you. It wasn't about you." "Ma'am, I have Korean. Do you know where my classroom is now?" "Behind the gym." "Behind the gym," she said. "Go to Korean." I went. And then I did something I've thought about since, which is that I went to the annex 2 days later after last period. When the corridor lights are on the timer and half of them stay off, and I stood outside her door for maybe 40 seconds with my hand not on the handle. And then I heard her chair move and I walked away fast, like a kid caught stealing. That was November. I want it on the record so nobody thinks I was noble about any of this. On Monday, the schedule went up. Second station, same hours, 6 shifts a week. My mother saw it before I did and came home in a good mood and made the soup with the beef in it. The lottery works like this. Once a month, one of the girls writes me a note. Not just any of them. The group is 4, and they rotate. And there's an order to it that they think I haven't worked out. The note goes in my desk before first period. Then at lunch, she comes and stands in front of me and asks whether I read it, and waits for an answer with her hands behind her back, and looks like she means it. Because that's the skill they're actually practicing. If I answer, she wins. If I don't answer by the end of the day, she loses and buys coffee for the table. I'm told the cost has gone up over the years. It used to be 1 Americano. Last spring, one of them bought 4 hot chocolates and a slice of cake, which suggests the stakes are getting inflated, and also that the losing has stopped being rare. Do I know it's a game? Yes. I have known since the second one, because the first one, in my first year I believed. I want that on the record too. I was 15 and I sat with a piece of folded paper in my hand for an entire chemistry lesson, and I was happy in a stupid, complete way for about 6 hours, and then at 4 o'clock in the corridor by the shoe lockers, she read it out in a voice she'd clearly practiced, and the sound they made was the worst sound I have heard in my life. Worse than anything that came after. Worse than anything my father has ever said in the kitchen. So I don't answer anymore. It's not resistance, it's just cheaper. November's note came from Seo Haein. She's the tallest of the 4 and the one who transferred in from Gwangju in second year. And her father drives the school bus, which is the part nobody in her group mentions. Her handwriting is round and pressed hard, so the paper has grooves in it. The note said she'd been watching me since the sports day and she was going to be honest even if it was embarrassing. And it named a place to meet and a time. She'd written it on the back of a homework sheet. That's the thing that got me. Not a proper piece of paper, she'd torn a corner off her own Wednesday assignment, the one due that afternoon, and there on the reverse was question 4 of the applied set, half finished, with the same wrong turn 3 times in a row. She kept trying to force a substitution that doesn't work there and starting over. I sat with that for most of second period. Then I turned the paper over and did question 4 on the back of her love letter. The whole thing, in the space I had, with the step she was missing marked with a bar 7 and a box around it. I didn't sign it. I folded it the way it had come and put it in her bag at the end of the day when she was at the window with the others. At 3:50, they did the reading in the corridor. Haein stood with her back to the shoe lockers and read the whole note out in a bright, carrying voice. All of her own words. The sports day and the honesty and the embarrassing part, and the other 3 did the sound, and a couple of second years stopped to watch because a crowd is a crowd. Then somebody said, "Wait, is there something on the back?" She turned it over. There was a pause of about a second and a half, which I know because I counted it, and then she laughed and said, "Oh my God, he did his homework on it." And everyone laughed at that, and it was the best possible outcome, and it was completely fine. She didn't throw it away, though. I watched her do it. She folded the paper along the crease she'd already made and put it in the inside pocket of her bag. The zip one, not the big one where the loose paper goes. Then she went off to the bus with the others, arms linked. And I stood there being a person who notices which pocket. Her Wednesday assignment came back the next week with a red circle on question 4 and full marks. And Mr. Han read the answer out to the class as an example of clean work and said it was nice to see someone finally use the substitution properly. And Haein looked at her desk the whole time. I got a 61 that week. 3 wrong, same 3 as always. Regional is held in a rented hall in Suwon, with the heating turned up too high, and I wasn't there, obviously. I was at school in double biology. What I know about that day I know from the photographs, which the school printed at A2 size and put in the case by the front entrance within a week, and from Hanel, who described the room to me afterwards in some detail, because he wanted me to have it. He said the desks were too small. He said a boy from Yongtong cried in the corridor at the halfway break. He said question 6 was the one I'd told him to expect, and that he'd finished the whole paper with 50 minutes left, and sat there, and looked around the room at everyone still working. And that this was the best 50 minutes of his life. 40 of those problems I had written out in longhand 2 weeks before at my kitchen table on the pad my mother buys at the stationer's for 401. I taught him question 6 on a Tuesday. I remember that he got it on the 4th pass and then said, "That's it? That's all it is?" And I said, "Yes. That's all it is," which is a sentence I've come to hate. The assembly was on the Monday. They do it in the gym with the whole school in rows on the floor and the teachers on chairs along the side and a stage they wheel out of the equipment room. Our year sat at the back, which is a privilege. My mother was there, standing at the doors with the other kitchen staff and their whites because the principal likes the photographs to show the whole community and she'd done something to her hair. Gold medal, regional, first place, Cho Hanul, 3rd year, class 2. He went up. Big applause, because the school gets ranked on this and everyone knows it, and because his father was on the stage with a microphone. Photographs. The certificate held at chest height with both hands. His mother came down the aisle afterwards and touched his sleeve, and someone got a picture of that too. Then the vice principal said there was one more. "Every year," he said, "we recognize a student who may not stand at the top of the results table, but whose effort supports everyone around him. This year the staff were unanimous. Certificate of Diligence. Kim Ujun, 3rd year. Class 2. Here's the thing they built, and I want to be clear about how well it's built, because I've had time to admire it. The Diligence Award is always given second. The recipient always walks up while the medal is still on stage. And the vice principal always says the same line at the handover, which he said again that Monday into the microphone, with his hand on my shoulder. "Let's have Ujin start the applause for our champion." So I stood on a stage in front of 900 people holding a piece of card with my name on it, and I clapped first, and then everybody else joined in. And the sound in a gym goes up into the rafters and comes back down late. So you hear it twice. I found my mother's face at the doors. She was clapping too. She had both hands up near her chin, the way you do when you're trying to be seen doing it. And she was looking at me, and she was proud. That's the part that isn't complicated. She was genuinely and completely proud of the card, of the word diligence, of her son being on a stage at all. Cho Gansok kept his hand on my shoulder through the photograph. It's in the case by the entrance now, and if you look at it, my father is not in it because he was at the warehouse, and Ms. Bay is not in it either because the annex staff don't come to assemblies. There's a gap on the left where somebody moved. Afterwards, in the corridor, Hanil walked past me and slowed down enough to say it without breaking step. "You clap loud." The newspaper ran the photo of him on the Thursday. Local edition, page 6. With the same pose. My mother bought 2 copies and cut one out, and bought a frame at the stationer's where she buys the pads, and put it on the wall opposite my desk so I'd have something to look at when I lifted my head. She told me it wasn't to shame me. She said it as she was hammering the nail in. "So you can see it," she said. "So you know what it looks like when someone works." The number showed up on a Thursday in December, at 11 at night, while I was brushing my teeth. 64. Not on the mirror, not in the room, about an arm's length in front of my face and slightly up, the way a light stays with you after you've looked at a bulb, except it didn't fade and it didn't move when I moved my eyes. I closed them. Still there. I put my hand through the space where it should have been, and my hand went through nothing, because there was nothing there. I did what anybody would do. I sat on the edge of the bath and waited for it to go away. Then I looked up the words for the kind of thing that puts numbers in your eyes, and read for an hour about occipital lesions and migraine aura, and one very bad forum thread. And then I turned the phone face down and lay on my back on the floor of a room I share with nobody, and thought about how much an MRI costs and who in this apartment would be told about it. 64. Steady. Not blinking, not pulsing, just sitting there like a price tag. Around 1 in the morning, I got bored of being frightened and got out the pad. I did an integral. An ordinary one, the kind that's in every textbook. And I wrote it out properly and put my name at the top of the page the way you do on a test, because I was tired, and my hands do that automatically. 65. I sat very still. Then I did another one, harder, and wrote my name again. 67. By 4 in the morning, I was at 81, and the sky over the laundromat was going the color it goes, and I had filled 14 pages, and I had a list, and the list said this: it moves when I finish something, not when I start, not when I understand it. When it's done and written down, it doesn't move for arithmetic. I counted the change in my pocket 90 times, and it sat there at 81 like it was insulted. It doesn't move if I do the work in my head. It has to be on paper. And it doesn't move. This took me until 3:30 to isolate, and I tested it 11 times to be sure if the paper doesn't have my name on it. I want to say I was scared. The true version is worse. I was happy. I lay on the floor at 4 in the morning next to 14 pages of solved problems in a building where the pipes knock, with a number floating over me like a hotel sign. And I was so happy I couldn't lie still, because for 4 years the only proof that I existed as anything was that I knew, privately, that I was good at this. And knowing it privately is a rope you can't climb. And now there was a number. A number is external. A number is the kind of thing that can be shown. I did 9 more problems before the alarm went and put my name on every one of them and went to school at 94. I want to tell you what 94 felt like, and I can't, so I'll tell you what it did. In double maths, Mr. Han put a proof on the board that he does every year at that point in the syllabus, and it's a decent one, and I've known it since I was 14. At 94, I saw the shape of it before he'd finished the second line. Not the steps. The shape. The way you see a face across a road before you can make out the eyes. There was a shorter route through the middle of it that skipped dilemma entirely, and it was just there, sitting in the open, and I had to put my pen down and look at the desk for a while. At lunch, I did the cafeteria total by accident, like always, and then out of curiosity, did the whole term's cafeteria income in my head with the fee waivers and the 11 staff, and the 4 days the kitchen was shut in October. 22,106,401, give or take the refunds. Then Cho Hanuel put the practice set on the table and said Wednesday, and I said yes, and the number sat there in front of my face while I said it, 94. I remember thinking very clearly on the third bench of the cafeteria at Taeyong High, whatever this is, it likes me better than anyone else here does. The provincial paper was due on the Wednesday, and I did it on the Tuesday night, which is when I found out what it costs. 38 problems. Cho Hanuel's name at the top in his handwriting, because he writes the header himself. That was his father's rule from the start. And I used to think it was arrogance, and now I think it was legal advice. I was at 94 when I started. It was a good night. The problems were the interesting kind. The ones where the province hires someone from a university and you can feel a real person on the other end of them. Problem 29 had a trap in it that would take out most of the room. I sat with that one for 40 minutes, which is the longest I'd sat with anything in a year. And when it came apart beautifully. And I laughed out loud at my own kitchen table at 1 in the morning like an idiot. I finished at 2:30. I squared the pages. I put them in the plastic wallet. 47. I heard it. That's the thing nobody would believe if I said it out loud. So I've never said it out loud. It made a sound in my head. A small one, like a cupboard door in another room. 94 to 47. I sat there with my hand flat on the plastic wallet and did the only thing I know how to do, which is check. I got out the pad and did an integral, an ordinary one, and put my own name on it. 48. So it hadn't broken. It was just half of what it had been an hour ago. I'm going to describe what 47 felt like, because everyone thinks losing something like this is dramatic, and it isn't. It's furniture being moved out of a house while you're at work. The room looks the same. You just keep reaching for things that aren't there. At 47, I could still do everything. Every single thing. Problem 29. The beautiful one. I read it again at 3 in the morning and I could still follow every step I'd written and agree with all of them. What was gone was the part before the steps. The seeing. At 94, the answer stood up out of the page and waved at me. At 47, I had to walk toward it. That's all. That's the whole difference. And it is the difference between me and everyone else in that building. And I had just paid it into a plastic wallet with another boy's name on it. I did not sleep. Around 4, I went back through the last 4 years in my head with the pad in front of me, and I made a column of dates. Every set, every paper, every worksheet since I was 13. Then I made a second column and put a 2 in it, and doubled up the page and stopped when the number got long enough to be stupid. 4 years of Fridays. 4 years of somebody else's name at the top of the page. I had spent my whole life being told in every possible register by the ranking sheet, by the man in room 302, by the picture frame on my wall, by my own father with a fold of bills on a table that I was an ordinary boy with a small talent that needed managing. And I had believed it enough to be grateful for the arrangement because the arrangement kept my mother in a hairnet at Station 2. It was never management. It was a tap, and it had been left running since I was 13, and nobody in that school had ever once told me where the water was going. At 7, I put on my uniform. At 8:20, I handed the plastic wallet to Cho Hanuel in the corridor outside room 302, and he took it without looking inside, because he never looks inside. He said something about the weather at the weekend. 48. In the air between his face and mine. "You look rough," he said. "Didn't sleep." Well, he tucked the wallet under his arm. "It's not like you've got anything on." That afternoon, I did an experiment I'm not proud of. 6th period was self-study. I took a sheet of paper and did 4 problems from an old national paper, real ones, the kind that take a while, and I wrote Cho Hanuel's name at the top before I started. 48, nothing moved. Not down, not up. So it isn't the name on the page. Then I put the sheet in an envelope and walked it up to room 302 and left it with the secretary, who wrote the time on it and put it in the tray, the way she does. I was on the 2nd floor landing when it went. 24. I sat down on the stairs. A first year going up asked me if I was okay, and I said, "Fine, thanks." And he went past, and I stayed there with my elbows on my knees, looking at a number the size of a coin, and worked out the actual rule, which is uglier than I'd hoped. It doesn't care who wrote it. It cares who gets the credit. It's not paper, it's handover. Which means the thing keeping score has been watching this school for 4 years, and has agreed with the school the entire time. I went to the annex after last period. The corridor lights back there run on a timer, and half of them never come on, and there were chairs stacked outside her door with the legs pointing out. The first years had left their number lines up, taped along the wall at the height of a small kid's eyes, with the negatives going off toward the fire door. Maze Bay was at her desk with a red pen, marking a stack of what looked like column addition. I stood in the doorway this time. "You still have it?" I said. "The report you filed." She didn't look up straight away. She finished the page she was on and put the pen down, and then she did look up, and she took a long time about it, which she'd earned. "Which one?" she said. "There are 4. I didn't say anything. "I photocopied every paper of his I ever marked," she said. "Every single one, 4 years. And they're not at school. And don't ask me where they are." She squared the stack. "I want you to understand that I didn't do that for you. I want you to be very clear about that before you sit down. I know. Do you? You want your classroom back?" She looked at me for a second, and then she laughed, one, short, not a nice one, and pushed the chair opposite her desk out with her foot. "Sit down," Ms. Bay said, "and tell me exactly how many of them you've written." I got as far as the 2nd year before the caretaker came round to lock the annex, and she told him we'd be another 20 minutes. And he said the timer was the timer, and she said, "Then bring the key back at 6, 24, over the desk between us where she couldn't see it." I told her about the papers, all of them, from 13. I told her about the schedule on the corkboard. I did not tell her about the number then or ever, and I'm not going to explain why here, because the reason is embarrassing and it comes up later anyway. When I got home, the frame was still on the wall opposite my desk with the photograph in it, the certificate held at chest height with both hands, and my mother had wiped the glass because she does it on Wednesdays. I tried cheating it once. I want that on the record before anything else in this part, because everything that comes after is me being clever. And I'd rather you knew I started by being stupid. The next set came down on a Monday. 20 problems, national qualifier practice. And by then I was at 31, having crawled back up over a week of nights. So I broke problem 11 on purpose. Not obviously. Nobody could have caught it. I put a sign error in the 4th line and carried it faithfully all the way to the end. So the working was beautiful and the answer was wrong. And if you're the person who wrote the 4th line, you can find it in a second. And if you're not, you can stare at that page until you die. Handed it in Tuesday, 31-15 on the 2nd floor landing, in the same spot as before, which I've come to think of as the place where I get charged. Wednesday, Cho Hanuel sat down opposite me at lunch. He didn't put anything on the table. That was new. 11's wrong, he said. Is it? My father marked it. He watched me. He asked me to explain the 4th line. I ate my rice. He asked me twice, Hanuel said. And there was something underneath his voice then, and it took me a second to place it, and when I placed it, I nearly laughed, because it was fear, Not of me. Of the man in room 302 who had asked his own son to explain a line and got nothing, and who now knew something he'd been able to avoid knowing for 4 years. Fix it, he said. Tonight, I'll look at it. Tonight, Eugen? He'd never used my name before. 4 years, and he'd never needed it. The schedule went up on the Monday after, and my mother was on the schedule, 4 shifts instead of 6, and the word beside her name was reduced. She came home and sat on the edge of the sofa in her coat, and did the arithmetic out loud, which I would have done for her in a quarter of a second, and I sat there and let her do it wrong twice. 4 shifts is 240,000, one less a month. The rent is 800. My father's warehouse pays weekly, and the weeks aren't the same size. They said it's the budget, she said. They said it's everyone. It wasn't everyone. I'd looked at the corkboard for 20 minutes. It was her. Maybe I should ask the vice principal, she said. He likes you. He said you were helpful. Don't ask him. He's always been very... Don't ask him, please. She looked at me then in a way she hadn't in a long time, because I'd said please in a voice that didn't belong to the son she has, and for about 4 seconds something crossed her face that I'd have given a year of my life to keep, and then it went, and she said I should worry about my own marks first. I redid the paper that night, all 20, clean with the sign error taken out and nothing left in its place, and I wrote it out slowly, and when I put it in the wallet, I made myself count out loud, 1 to 10, so I'd be looking at the number when it happened. 15 to 7. I got the wallet to Hanuel before first period. He opened it in front of me, which he had never done, and flicked to problem 11 and read the 4th line, and then he did something worse than gloating. He nodded, like a man taking delivery of a repaired appliance. The schedule was corrected on the Thursday. 6 shifts. My mother made the soup with the beef in it and told me the vice principal had asked after me personally. 7. At 7, I could not see the shape of anything. I sat in double maths and copied down the board like everyone else, 1 line at a time, waiting for each line to end before I knew what the next one was. Which is how everyone in that room has always experienced mathematics. And it is a completely normal way to live. And I want to be clear that I found it unbearable within 40 minutes. That was the week I stopped trying to be clever about the tap and started thinking about the pipe. Ms. Bay's photocopies live in a storage unit off the Anyang Road, Unit 144, 42,001 a month, which she has paid out of her own salary for 4 years. She took me there on a Saturday in January on a bus that stops 12 times. You're going to ask why I don't keep them at home, she said, before I asked. My husband thinks I let it go in the spring of the year I got moved. I told him I let it go, and then I rented a unit. That's... Don't? Inside there was a desk chair with a wheel missing, 2 boxes of a dead relative's crockery, and 11 document files, labeled by year, in a handwriting that gets angrier as it goes forward. She'd photocopied everything, not just Hanuel's, mine as well. Look at yours, she said. 3rd year September, 61 out of 100. My name at the top in my own writing, my bar 7s all through it, and 3 problems wrong. Now the next one, 61, and the next. 61, 64, 61, 58, 61. 4 years, Ms. Bay said. She had her coat on and her hands in the pockets, and she was looking at the wall, not at the files. Do you know how many students in the history of this province have scored between 58 and 64? 22 times running, with a different 3 wrong every time? Because I'll tell you, nobody. Nobody does that. Random doesn't do that. That's a person walking a line. It's 3 every time. I know it's 3 every time. I've known since your first year. She turned round. Now look at this one. It was from the bottom of the earliest file, and the paper was a different weight. Older stock, grayer, the kind the school used before the copier was replaced. Regional Mathematics Olympiad Preliminary Round, 25 years ago. There were 2 names on the front of the packet, in 2 different hands. The invigilating teacher, Cho Gansok, and on the line under it, half torn away where somebody had removed the top sheet in a hurry, the tail of a student's name. 3 characters, the last one gone, the first 2 still there. Kim, and then most of a Tay. He was 27, she said. First posting. That packet's in my unit because it was in a box of dead paperwork the office threw out in my 2nd year, and I took it home because I recognized the handwriting inside it. Whose handwriting? Not his son's. She put it back in the file. Whoever wrote those solutions wrote them the way you write them. Same order of operations. Same habit of putting the check at the end instead of the middle. It's not a common way to do it. It's the way somebody teaches you if they're teaching you badly, actually. But it's consistent. I stood in a storage unit off the Anyang Road with a number at 7 floating between me and a cardboard file, and did nothing with any of that, because I had already decided the top sheet was missing for a boring reason, and because there are things you can be looking straight at for months. There was a boy before you, Ms. Bay said. I don't know who he was. I know Cho Gansok was moved to this district in the same year that boy's school stopped entering the regional round, and I know that when I filed my second report the principal told me to my face that this had been looked at once already, a long time ago, and settled. Settled how? He said the family withdrew it. On the bus back, she asked me what I was going to do, and I said I didn't know, and she said that was fine. And then she said the only genuinely kind thing anyone said to me that winter. You're not obliged to be interesting about this, she said. You can just stop. People will say you were nothing, and you'll be 40, and they'll be wrong. And that's survivable. I want you to know that's on the table. I said thank you. 7. I got off 2 stops early and walked the rest so I wouldn't have to be in a heated space with somebody who just offered me a way out. February's note never came. I know the order. Yuna, then Sohee, then Haeyun, then Minji, then round again. And it had been running like that for 2 years, and February was Sohee's, and Sohee didn't write one. What happened instead, according to the version that reached me by Wednesday, was that Seo Haeyeon told the group at the bus stop that she wasn't doing it anymore. And Minji asked whether she was in love with the calculator, and Haeyeon said, "It's boring," which was the smartest possible answer and still not good enough, because the 4 of them had been 4 since second year, and now they were 3 and a problem. They gave her 2 weeks. That's the part I'd never seen from the inside, how fast a group can turn a person into a project. The linked arms stopped. Then the seat next to her stopped. Then somebody put a calculator on her desk with a heart drawn on the screen in marker, which is genuinely funny, and I'd have laughed if I'd been anyone else. And her father got moved to nights. Mr. Seo drives the school bus, Route 4, the one that goes out past the reservoir. Nights means the district depot freight, 11 till 7, which pays less and means he sleeps in the day in a 2-room flat with a daughter trying to study. The bus roster is not the vice principal's business, but the school contracts through the district, and the district likes to be told when a driver's family has a discipline concern, and there had been a concern, apparently, about Seo Haeyeon's attitude. She came and found me on the 11th of February, at the far end of the 3rd-floor corridor by the window that doesn't shut. And she was not sorry. And I want to describe her exactly as she was because everyone who tells this story afterwards makes her softer than she is. You did nothing, she said. Hello. 4 years. Everyone in that building takes a piece of you and you say thank you. She had her bag against her chest. I read the note out in front of the lockers. I did that, and you did my homework on the back of it and put it in my bag like it was nothing, like I hadn't just. You wanted question 4. I wanted you to be angry. It came out loud, and she looked down the corridor to check and lowered it. I wanted you to say something to me. Anything, once. Okay, she said. Great. She took something out of her bag and put it on the windowsill. It was a paper, folded twice, and I knew what it was before I opened it, because the ink had gone through the way his ink goes through. Cho Hanel's mock paper from December. In the bin outside room 302 where he throws them, because the sets come back to him after marking, and he doesn't want them in the house. He binned it in front of me, she said. He got 100 and asked me if I wanted to see it. And I said no, so he binned it to show me he could. I unfolded it. 38 problems in my handwriting, with his header on the top in his, and a red 100 and the marker's initials. How many of those are yours? 38. She stood there. So do something, Seo Haeyeon said. Or don't, and I'll have lost this for nothing. And I want you to know I'll hate you for it, and it'll be fair. She went to class. I stayed at the window with the paper. I want to be honest about the next part, because it's the part I'd cut if I were making myself look better. My first thought was not gratitude. It was that a bin outside room 302 gets emptied on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that Cho Hanel has been throwing my handwriting into it twice a week for 4 years, and that nobody in this school had ever had a reason to look in there except a girl who'd just been made lonely on my account. The second thought was that a girl who is being punished for me is worth more as a witness than a girl who is not. I thought that. In those words, more or less, standing at a window with her handwriting still on the inside pocket of a bag 2 floors down, I've decided to leave it in. Here is what I decided to do with the tap, and I want to lay it out plainly, because it worked and it nearly killed the part of me that was worth saving. Everything I had was theory, a number only I could see, photocopies with no top sheet, a handwriting match that any lawyer would take apart in a morning, because a boy in the same class can copy a boy's 7s. Ms. A had filed 4 reports on evidence better than mine, and she was behind the gym marking column edition. So I stopped trying to prove I was good at maths and started building a thing that would have to be explained. I needed the tap open all the way. I needed to give them everything, at the fastest rate they'd take it, until the difference between the boy who couldn't explain his own fourth line and the boy who couldn't add up was too wide to be a coincidence. And then I needed a room where you can't hand a page across a desk. National qualifiers run in April. There is one thing about the national round that everybody in the province knows and nobody thinks about, which is that the final stage isn't written. It's the board. You go up, you get a problem you haven't seen, and you talk. No paper in, no paper out, no 50 minutes to sit there feeling like a king. Just a man from a university asking, and again, and why? Cho Han-il has never in his life explained anything to anyone, so I gave them the winter. January, the qualifier practice 40 problems, 7-3. Late January, the provincial selection set 31, 3-1. February, the school's entry paper for the national round, which Cho Gansok wanted flawless, and which I made flawless. 1-0. Nothing broke. The lights didn't go out. I handed the wallet to the secretary in room 302, and she wrote the time on it and put it in the tray. And I walked down to the second floor landing and waited to feel something and felt the handrail. 0 doesn't arrive like a fall. It arrives like a word you can't find. I got to double maths, and Mr. Han said, take out your books, and I took out my book and looked at question 1, which was a quadratic, and the page was a page. I knew what a quadratic was. I could tell you the definition. I could tell you the formula, and I did in my head. And the letters sat there in a row and refused to become anything. I put my pen on the paper and wrote the number 2, because I had to write something. Then I did what I'd promised myself I'd do at the bottom, which was take out the pad under the desk and test it properly. And I wrote 17 plus 6, and I looked at it for a long time. 23 is the answer. I want to be clear that I know that now, and I knew it then in the way you know your own address, while somebody's holding your head underwater. I could not do it. I sat in a maths class in a school where I had personally written the winning papers of the last 4 regional rounds, and I could not add 17 and 6. I looked up. There was a number in front of my face, 0. And underneath it, for the first time since December, a second line, small, which I have thought about every day since, held elsewhere. 2 words, not gone, not spent, held. Mr. Han asked me to read out my answer to question 1, and I said I hadn't finished. And he said, try. And the class was quiet in the way it gets when something is about to be enjoyable. And I said I didn't know, and he let it go faster than I deserved. And Cho Han-il, 2 rows over, did not turn around, which was the loudest thing that happened in that room. The 2 weeks at 0 are the part people don't believe. Day 1, I told myself it was fatigue. Day 2, I stood in front of the vending machine on the second floor with a 1001 note and could not work out whether it would cover a drink at 900, and I stood there long enough that a teacher asked if the machine was broken, and I said yes, and walked away, and drank from the tap by the science rooms. Day 3, Mr. Han sent me to the board. He'd been building to it since Tuesday. He isn't cruel, he's tired, and I'd given him 3 days of silence and a page with a 2 on it, and teachers have a reflex for that. Get them up, embarrass them slightly, they come back. It works 9 times in 10. He wrote an ordinary linear equation on the board, the kind you meet at 14. 3x plus 8 equals 29. I stood next to it with the chalk. I want to describe what was on the board from where I stood. Symbols in a row with a line under the last 2. I knew each one. I knew what an equals sign is. I could have told you the name of every markup there and the order of operations and why the operations are in that order and what you'd normally do first. And the doing was not there. The way a word you use every day goes, and you stand in a shop pointing at it. 40 seconds is a long time at a blackboard. Then a minute. Somebody at the back said the answer, quietly, to be helpful or to be funny, and there's no way to tell those apart from the front. Mr. Han took the chalk out of my hand. He did it gently, which was worse. Sit down, he said. Then on Thursday they sent me to the annex. That was Mr. Han again. He'd talked to the year head, and the year head had talked to somebody. And the recommendation came back that Kim Ujin should sit in on the first-year remedial hour twice a week to rebuild fundamentals, and that this was nothing to be ashamed of. The room behind the gym, with the number lines taped along the wall at the height of a small kid's eyes. Ms. Bay had 13 first years in there and a stack of column edition, and she looked up when I came in the door with the slip. And she read the slip, and she did not react at all, which took her about 4 seconds and probably cost her something. Take the seat by the window, she said. Sohn, move over. A 12-year-old moved his pencil case for me. They were doing times tables, not the writing, the calling out kind, where she goes round the room and you answer on your turn. 7/8, said Miss Bay, and a girl in the front said 56, 6 9s, 54, 4 7s. And I sat in a room with 13 children and my mouth open and nothing in it, and the boy next to me, Sown, whispered 28 without looking up from his page. The way you'd pass a note, and I said 28 and Ms. Bay said good and moved on. My mother heard on the Friday. She heard it in the kitchen, from a teacher, in front of 2 other members of staff, and the teacher wasn't being unkind either. She said it warmly. She said it's good that he's getting help, and my mother took her hairnet off in the corridor and cried where nobody was supposed to see her. Except that the corridor by the kitchens has a window onto the yard. She didn't shout at home. That's what I'd expected. And it isn't what happened. She sat with her coat still on and asked me one question. And the question was, what have you been doing all this time? I could have said it, all of it, right there. And I had the paper from the bin in my bag while she asked. Nothing, I said. I've been doing nothing. Because at 0, I had no proof of anything. And because if she went into that school angry with 4 shifts on the line and a corkboard on the wall, they would have taken her hours and I would still have been a boy who can't add. That's the calculation I made at the kitchen table. It was correct. I've checked it many times since, and it's correct, and I'd like to know why that doesn't help. She got up and washed the plate that was already clean. Then she went into my room and took the frame off the wall, the clipping, the pose, the certificate held at chest height, and I heard her, through the thin wall, put it in the bottom of the wardrobe under the winter bedding. She never said why. I've decided she did it because a boy in the annex shouldn't have to look at that. And I know there's a worse reading, which is that a boy in the annex doesn't get to be compared to a champion anymore, and I've decided not to use that one. The class did not enjoy the annex thing the way you'd think. That's worth setting down, because the version people expect is 3 weeks of jokes, and it wasn't. It was 4 days of jokes and then something much quieter and worse. The jokes were fine. Somebody wrote calculator on the edge of my desk in pencil, and then on the Wednesday went over it and added broken, which is good, and I've never pretended otherwise. A second year, I don't know, asked me in the yard to add 2 numbers, and I said I couldn't. And he said no, seriously. And I said I know, and he stood there working out whether he was allowed to keep going, and decided against it, which was decent of him. Then it stopped, and the other thing started, which is that people began to be nice to me. Not warmly. Administratively. Yuna moved a chair out of my way in the corridor. Somebody I'd never spoken to picked up my pencil case when it went off the desk and put it back without a word. Mr. Han stopped calling my name in registration in the way that means a question might follow. They'd refiled me. For 4 years, I'd been the second best mathematician in the year, which is a rank, and ranks come with a certain amount of aggression because people compete with you. Now I was the boy who goes to the annex. You don't compete with that. You hold doors for it. I'd rather have had the jokes. I want to be honest that I'd rather have had the jokes because at least a joke means somebody's still looking at you. The last lottery note came in the middle of that fortnight. March was Minji's turn, and Minji did it. And she did it knowing what I was, which took a kind of commitment I hadn't credited her with. The note was in my desk before first period, and it was 2 lines long, and the second line said she'd help me with my maths if I wanted. I read it at the desk with 13-year-old me somewhere behind my eyes, still doing worksheets at a kitchen table and feeling useful. I did not answer, because I never answer. And at 4 o'clock she read it out at the shoe lockers to 3 people instead of the usual crowd. And it didn't work. And one of the 3 said, "That's a bit much, isn't it?" And Minji said, "He doesn't even notice," and put it in her pocket. She was right, is the thing. By then, I genuinely didn't. At 0, there is a great deal going on inside a person, and none of it has room for a piece of paper in a desk. Seo Haeun watched that from the end of the corridor with her bag against her chest and did not come over, because we hadn't spoken since February and wouldn't again until April. And Cho Hanuel, who by then had everything of mine that could be moved, walked past me in the yard that week and slowed down and looked at me for a second too long, and didn't say anything at all. And that was the first time I understood that he'd started being frightened. There were 9 days in the middle of that fortnight when I tried to give it back. I've left this out of every version I've told out loud, and it belongs here, because it's the only time I went to him. I waited outside room 302 on a Tuesday after last period, and when the secretary had gone, I knocked, and Cho Gansok said, "Come in," without looking up, and then saw it was me, and put his pen down and smiled the whole face one. "How's the annex?" "Fine. Good. Ms. Bay is thorough." He gestured at the chair. I didn't take it. "Sit down. You look like a man about to ask for something." I asked him to let me sit the national round, not to stop anything, not to admit anything. I asked to be entered under the school with Cho Haneil, both of us. And I said, and I'd worked on this sentence for 2 days, that a school with 2 candidates in the provincial band looks better to the foundation than a school with 1. He heard me out properly. He always did. That's the thing about him that I still can't get round. He listens like it matters, and afterwards you feel like you've had a fair hearing, and then nothing has changed. "You can't add up," he said. "That's temporary." "Is it?" He turned his pen over. Ujin, I've watched you for 4 years, and I have never once thought you were stupid. So I'm going to talk to you as an adult. A school gets one story, one boy, one photograph, one line in the district report. 2 candidates isn't twice as good. It's a story with a hole in it, because everyone asks which one is real. Then let it be me. And he said the thing I hear when I can't sleep, in the warm voice, with no cruelty in it at all, as a straightforward statement of fact from a man who had done the arithmetic long before I walked in. It's never going to be you. You've got no father who can stand up at a foundation dinner. You've got a mother in a hairnet, and you go to the annex on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Whatever's in your head, nobody in this district is going to put their name behind that photograph. He picked the pen back up. The boy who wins has to look like a winner. I didn't build that, I just work in it. I stood there. Do the papers or don't, he said. It's April. Frankly, at this point, it's about even whether Hanul needs you, which was true, and which he'd noticed, and which meant the tap had been left running so long that he'd stopped counting what came out of it. Right, I said. Close the door properly. It sticks. I went down to the second-floor landing and sat on the stairs where I usually get charged, and there was nothing to charge, because I was at 0 and had been for 11 days. And a first year came up past me 2 at a time. I'd like to say that was the moment I decided everything. It wasn't. I sat there for about 20 minutes, and what I mostly felt was that he'd been decent about it, which is the most disgusting sentence in this entire account, and I've decided to leave it in as well. Ms. Bay kept me back after the second remedial hour and shut the door and stood with her arms folded. What did you do? Nothing. Kim Ujun. I gave them everything, I said. All of it, on purpose, as fast as they'd take it. She didn't ask what everything meant. I've thought about that a lot. She looked at me for a while, and then she went to the cupboard and came back with a stack of the first year's exercise books and put them on the desk between us, sat down opposite and picked up a pencil. Then we start here, she said. The first thing she made me do was long multiplication. 2 digits by 2 digits in the grid, with the carrying written in the little boxes above. I got it wrong. Twice. The third time I got it right, and it took me 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Because she timed it, and she wrote the time in the corner of the page, and said we'd do it again on Thursday. Here's what I hadn't understood in 11 years of being the best in every room I'd ever walked into. At 94, I never did any of this. At 94, the answer arrived, and I built a staircase down to it afterwards so other people could follow. And the staircase was decoration, and I could put it up in whatever style the marker liked. I have written 4 years of solutions I did not derive. I derived nothing. I saw, and then I dressed it. At 0, there is only the staircase. Every step has to be a real step, standing on the one below it, or the whole thing comes down. Long multiplication took me 9 days. Then fractions, which insulted me, and which I got wrong for 3 days running because I kept trying to do it the way I remembered, rather than the way it works. And there's a difference, and I'd never had to meet it. Then, in the 3rd week, she gave me a proof. Not a hard one, the angle in a semicircle. It's on the wall of every classroom in the country, and I'd known it since I was 9, and I had never once in my life been made to say why. I sat with it for 2 hours in a room behind a gym with the strip light buzzing and 13 empty desks and the number lines going off toward the fire door. And I got it. Slowly, from the bottom, one true step at a time, with the radii equal because that's what a radius is, and the isosceles triangles falling out of that, and the angles adding, and then the thing closing over the top like a lid. I sat back. I had known that proof for 8 years, and I had never known it at all. And the difference between those 2 sentences is the only thing in this account I'd call good news. Again, said Ms. Bay, and took the paper away. I did it again from memory and got it wrong at the 2nd step, and she gave me back the paper and I did it a 3rd time. And by then it was 6, and the caretaker was rattling the door. 2 things happened in those 2 weeks that I didn't tell her about. The first is that the number stayed at 0, and the words underneath it stayed too, and none of the work moved it. Not one problem. Not the semicircle. Not the 9 days of long multiplication. Whatever it counts, it doesn't count that. Which means the tap and the learning are different systems, and that turned out to be the most useful thing I knew. The second is that on the Tuesday of the 2nd week, I passed the trophy case at the front entrance where they'd put the assembly photograph, and Cho Hanul was standing at it with 3 of his people, doing an impression of me at the blackboard. He had the chalk hand up and everything. He held the pose and counted, out loud, 1, 2, 3, and they were laughing. He got to 11. I know because I stood there and let him finish, which I hadn't planned and couldn't tell you the reason for. 11 seconds, in front of a glass case with a photograph in it of me clapping. The last week of February, Cho Hanul solved something in front of me, self-study back of the room. He had the provincial selection paper out. The one I'd written in January, marked and returned, and he was going through it with a girl from class 1 who wanted help. And he was helping her, and that was the thing that stopped me. Problem 17. A functional equation with a substitution most third years never see. He explained it to her. Not perfectly. He got the order wrong and had to back up once, and he used the phrase, "and then it just falls out," which is a phrase I use, and he did the check at the end instead of the middle. In November, he could not tell his father what happened in the fourth line of problem 11. I went home and did the only thing I'm actually good at, which is make a list. This time I had 2 columns, and I filled them in with a pencil and a ruler because at 0 I couldn't hold 20 dates in my head anymore. Left column, every set I'd handed over. Date, size, what the number did. Right column, every time in 4 years I'd watched Cho Hanul do something he couldn't do before. December, first year, the wallet with the entrance paper. 3 weeks later, he answered a question in class about induction that he'd asked me about the previous term. The summer of second year, the 2 big sets, back to back, and I dropped a third of the number in 9 days. September of that year, he stopped bringing me the easy half. Just stopped. I remember being relieved, and I remember thinking he'd got lazy. He hadn't got lazy. He'd stopped needing them, the regional, last spring. Then, in the autumn, he started correcting my working out loud at the Friday checks, not just crossing out, correcting with a reason attached, and I'd taken it as theater. And February. 1 to 0, the flawless entry paper, and then a boy at the back of a self-study room explaining a functional equation to a girl from class 1, using my phrase, doing my check at the end, which Ms. Bay had told me in a storage unit off the Anyang Road was not a common way to do it, held elsewhere. I sat at the kitchen table with a ruled sheet under my hands, and I would like to say I felt clean rage. What I felt was the specific private humiliation of a person who has been robbed for 4 years and spent the whole time congratulating himself on how cheap it was. Nothing had been spent. Nothing had been wasted. There is no waste in this. Every hour I put into a plastic wallet went somewhere, and it went into a boy 2 rows over, and the school clapped. And my mother framed the newspaper, and I clapped first because a man with his hand on my shoulder asked me to. I got out the paper Seo Hyun had taken from the bin outside room 302 and put it next to the list. Then I did something small, and it mattered more than everything else that week. I took the pad and wrote out the semicircle proof from the beginning and put my own name at the top. 0, held elsewhere. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. He has the fast part now. He can have it, because here's what I'd worked out on 9 days of long multiplication in a room with number lines taped to the wall at the height of a small kid's eyes. He took the seeing. He could not take the staircase, because when he was taking it, I didn't have one. He has 4 years of arriving at answers. I have 3 weeks of knowing why. In April, there is a room with a board in it, and a man from a university who asks why, and asks again, and does not accept it, just falls out. I put the pencil down and went to bed and slept 11 hours, which I hadn't done since December, and in the morning I went to the annex early and waited outside the door for Ms. Bay with the semicircle in my hand. And when she came round the corner with her bag and her coffee, she stopped walking when she saw my face. "What?" she said. "I need the entry form for the national round," I said. "The one that doesn't go through the school." There are 2 ways into the national round. The school route. The vice principal signs a nomination. The district stamps it. The school's name goes on the entry, and the results come back addressed to the principal. That door has a man standing in it. The other one is a form, independent entry through a regional education center for students whose schools don't run a program, which in practice means kids from small towns and the ones being taught at home. 2 pages, a parent or a guardian signature, a center stamp, a fee of 30,000 won, and a box where you write your school if you have one. You are allowed to leave the box blank. Ms. Bay printed it in the annex and read it 3 times before she gave it to me. "You understand that if you do this, you're on your own," she said. "No coaching from the school, no practice sets, no transport. And when they find out, and they will, the center publishes the entry list. You have no protection at all. What protection do I have now? Fair. The Anyang Center is above a driving school on a road with 3 phone shops on it. The woman behind the desk asked which school, and I said I'd rather leave it blank. And she said fine in the voice of a person who has heard worse, and told me the fee had to be cash, and I gave her 30,000 won that Ms. Bay had put on the desk in the annex 2 days before and refused to discuss. Then the form wanted a guardian's signature. I want to talk about the 4 days that followed, because I've been asked since why I didn't just forge it. I could have. My father's signature is 2 strokes and a hook, and I've seen it on warehouse paperwork since I was small. Nobody at that center would ever check. What stopped me was not honesty. It was that a forged signature is a thread. If the school ever went at this seriously, and they would, and there is no version of this where you win an argument with a vice principal by giving him a document to hold up. And everything I built comes down over 2 strokes and a hook. So I asked him. Saturday morning. He was at the table with the radio on and his back to the door. I put the form down next to his cup with the Guardian box facing him and said I needed a signature for an exam. He read it. That took a while, and I stood there through all of it. What's this? National Maths Round? Entry. Through who? The Anyang Center. He looked at the box where the school name should be, which was empty, and then at me, and something happened in his face that I cataloged at the time as annoyance, and have had to refile since. Your school not entering you? No. Why not? Because I'm in the remedial class, I said. Because I can't add up. You've heard. He put the form down and picked up his cup and didn't drink from it. 30,001, he said. It's paid. Who paid it? A teacher. That's when he got up. He got up fast enough that the chair went back and hit the wall, and he stood over the table with both hands on it and said the thing I've carried around since, in a voice I'd never heard him use, not even at his worst, don't take money from a school. It's not from the school, it's, don't take money from anybody in that building. He was breathing like he'd carried something up the stairs. Not a coffee, not a bus fare. Nothing you can't put back on the table in front of them. It's 30,001 for an exam. I know what it's for. And then he sat back down and turned the radio up and said, leave it there, I'll look at it. And did not look at it for 4 days. On the Wednesday, it was on my desk with the Guardian box filled in, and the signature was the 2 strokes and the hook, and next to it, in the corner of the page, he'd written the date wrong by a year and crossed it out and done it again. He never said a word about it. Not that week, not at the end. When I tried to say something at dinner, he asked whether the tap in the bathroom was still going, and I said yes, and he said he'd look at it. March, and I stopped handing things over. There was no scene. Cho Hanuil put a set on my desk on a Tuesday, and I said no. And he waited for the rest of the sentence, and there wasn't one. And he picked it up and left. It took 9 seconds. 4 years. 9 seconds. I did the first problem of it myself that night, on my own paper, with my name at the top. It took me 50 minutes, and I checked it twice. 1. That was the whole number 1, in front of my face, in a room where a boy had once sat at 94 and laughed out loud at problem 29. 2 the next night. 4 by Friday. It doubles. That's the joke of it. It goes back the same way it went out, which means the first week gives you nothing and looks like nothing and feels like nothing. And you have to do the work anyway, on faith, with a number the size of a coin telling you you're a child. I did 19 days like that, every night. Ms. Bay gave me a syllabus that started 3 years below where I'd been, and I did all of it in order. And she marked it in red in the annex at lunchtime with first year's edition still stacked on the corner of the desk. The school noticed in the second week, because of the mock, 74 out of 100. Not brilliant. Better than 61. And this is the part that broke the room. It was the first paper I had ever handed in with no wrong answers in it. I ran out of time. I'd worked every problem from the bottom like the annex taught me, and I got through 18 of 20, and all 18 were right, and I left 2 blank. Mr. Han called me to the front and asked me to explain question 15. I explained question 15. It took 90 seconds. I did it from the bottom, 1 true step on the one below it. And when I finished, he asked me to do 16 as well, which wasn't on the paper, and I did that one too. Then he sat on the edge of his desk and looked at me for a bit and asked, quite gently, whether I'd had help with the paper. The class made a noise. Somebody said from the first years, and it landed, and it was funny, and I want to record that it was genuinely funny, and I nearly laughed. Here's what I couldn't say to him, that a boy who scores 61 22 times running and then jumps to 74 with nothing wrong on it looks exactly like a cheat, and that 4 years of a man in room 302 walking me down a line had built the perfect cage. Because now the truth had the shape of a lie. No help, I said. Ujin. You can put me in a room with no one in it and give me a paper, I said. Any paper you like. He didn't take that up. He was already regretting the question. You could see him doing the sum where a remedial kid gets accused in front of 30 people. And he said, all right, well done, and moved on to the homework. Cho Hanil caught me at the shoe lockers. He'd been at 98. He is, and I want to be exact because it matters later, genuinely very good now. He'd stopped needing me before Christmas, and I hadn't understood what I was looking at. 74, he said. Yes. You're at 74 because you're allowed to be. You know that. He had his bag on one shoulder, and he was smiling, and this is the only time in 4 years I've ever heard him say something true. You think this is you coming back? This is me not needing to hold you down. There's a difference, and you don't know which one you're in. I put my shoes on. Where's the Anyang Center? He said. I straightened up. My father's secretary types the mail, Sho Hanol said. The list came Tuesday. They took my mother's job on the 21st of March. Not the shifts, the job, a letter printed by the same secretary, citing a review of catering staffing and a restructuring of the second station. Effective the end of the month, with thanks for 15 years of service. She read it standing in the kitchen with her coat on. Then she read it again. Then she put it on the table and asked me what I'd done. Not what happened. What I'd done. She had it in one, which I've never stopped thinking about, because it means some part of her had known the shape of the arrangement for years without ever letting the knowledge come up into the light where she'd have to act on it. I told her. All of it. 4 years from 13, the worksheets, room 302, the corkboard, the 61s. It took 20 minutes and she didn't sit down for any of it. At the end she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because of the schedule." "I would have. You'd have gone in and asked him," I said. "You'd have gone into that office and been polite to him, and he'd have been warm to you, and you'd have come home and told me he said I was helpful." She hit me across the face. It wasn't hard. She's not a big woman, and she'd been holding a letter. It was the only time in my life, and I have never held it against her for 1 minute, because she had just found out that the man who called her at work to say her son was doing well had been taking her son apart for 4 years while she framed the evidence and hung it on his wall. Then she went into the bedroom and shut the door, and I heard the wardrobe, and I heard her getting the frame out from under the winter bedding. My father came home at 7. She'd told him on the phone. He came up the stairs the way he does when he's had a few, but he hadn't had any, and that was worse, because there was nothing between him and it. He didn't take his boots off. He stood in the doorway of my room with the letter in his hand and said, "You went at him." "Yes. After I told you not to take a bus fare from anybody in that building, you went at the vice principal of your school. He's had 4 years of." He came across the room and took a handful of my collar and put me into the wardrobe door, which is thin, and it went in and came back out with a crack down the panel that's still there. He was shouting, most of it doesn't matter. It was the usual, waste, ungrateful, the money he doesn't have. The woman in the kitchen who did 15 years. But in the middle of it, he said this, "They will let you win. Do you understand what I'm telling you? They will let you get right up to the edge of it. They will let you think you've got them, and then they will come and take it off the table. And you will have nothing. And you'll be 38 years old on a forklift telling yourself you nearly—" He stopped. We both stood there. His hand was still in my collar, and he was looking at me from about 20 centimeters, and I watched him hear himself. He let go. He straightened my collar, which he has never done in his life. An awkward, two-handed job, like a man handling somebody else's child. Then he went and sat in the kitchen with the radio off. At 11 that night, I heard him and my mother in the other room, and their voices went on for a long time. And once she said, quite clearly through the wall, "When? When was this?" And he said something I couldn't hear. And she said, "You never told me you did maths." My mother looked for work for 19 days. I want to put that in, because everything else in this account is about a boy and a board, and the actual texture of that spring was a woman on the phone in a kitchen at 4:30 in the afternoon, with a biro and the free paper open at the back page. 15 years in a school kitchen is not a qualification anywhere. It's a reference, and a reference has to be signed, and the person who signs it is the person who ended it. They gave her 3 lines. It confirmed the dates of her employment and stated that her contract had ended in a restructuring of catering provision, and it did not contain a single word about her work. And everybody who reads references knows what that means. She called the district office 11 times. She got a review form. She filled it in at the kitchen table over 2 evenings, and I sat opposite and did not help her with a word of it. Because if any part of that form was in my handwriting, it would come back on her. She said on the second evening, without looking up, "You knew about the corkboard when you were 13. "Yes." "And you did his homework for 4 years so I could keep 6 shifts. "Yes," she went on writing. "You should have let them take the shifts," my mother said. "I've had 2 years to find something to say back to that, and I still haven't got anything. And when I try, what comes out is arithmetic. 240,000 a month. The rent, the weeks that aren't the same size. And she was there for all of it and knows the numbers better than I do. And she was still right, and both those things are true at once and don't cancel." The review came back in May. The restructuring was found to be procedurally correct. She got the bakery on the Anyang Road in the second week. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 hours, and the man who runs it is called Mr. Buyun, and he is 71 and lets her take the end of the sponge cakes home on Thursdays. And for about a month, those Thursdays were the only good thing in that apartment. The other thing that happened in those 19 days is that she started asking me about maths, not to check on me. She'd ask what I was doing, and I'd say a proof. And she'd ask what a proof was, and I'd tell her, and she'd listen with her hands in a bowl of something and say, "And that's it? That's the whole job?" And I'd say yes, and she'd say, "For that they took my kitchen." One evening she asked me to show her one, the semicircle. I did it on the back of the free paper, slowly, from the bottom, the way I'd been taught behind a gym, and she followed it to the fourth line and then said she'd lost it. And I went back and did the fourth line again, and she got it, and said, "Oh," and then went and put the rice on. That's the only time in my life my mother has understood a piece of mathematics, and it was one line of Euclid on the back of a jobs page. And I'd give the placement at Daejeon back before I'd give that up. The box was in the storage cage on the ground floor, behind the bicycles, under a roll of lino. I went down on the Sunday to look for the winter blankets because we were putting things away, and my mother had stopped speaking in sentences, and I moved the lino. And there was a sunken electronics box with tape gone yellow, warehouse payslips, a wedding photo loose, a stack of certificates in a plastic sleeve. Certificate of Diligence. Anyang District Mathematics Program. Kim Taesop, 3rd year. There were 5 of them. 5 years of the same piece of card, and behind them at the bottom of the sleeve, a regional preliminary packet, the gray older paper, with a name on the front in a young hand, the same 2 strokes and hook underneath, and with it folded in 4, a page of solutions in handwriting that could have been mine. Same order of operations. Check at the end. Kim Taesop, the tail of a name torn off a packet in Unit 114 off the Anyang Road. I took it upstairs and put it on the kitchen table in front of him and sat down opposite and said nothing at all, which is a thing I learned from a woman who marks column addition behind a gym. He looked at it for a long time. "You went in the cage." "Yes." He turned the certificate over like there'd be something on the back. "There isn't. There never is. He was 27, my father said. New. Everybody liked him." Then he told me, badly, out of order, with long gaps, and I'm going to set it down straight because he couldn't. Cho Gansok came to that school in his first posting, with a plan that was smaller then. There was a boy in the 2nd year who was good, and there was a district program with a nomination form, and the nomination form went through the teacher. The boy wrote, the teacher's favorite entered, 5 years of a certificate saying diligence. "Did you have a number?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He asked me what I meant, and I said nothing, and he let it go, and that is the closest I have ever come. And it's as close as I got. What he told me instead, at 19 he sat the entrance exam for a teacher's college in Suwon and could not do it. Not badly, could not. He sat with the paper for 2 hours and wrote his name and the number of the first question. And then, he said, it was like the page was in another language, and I was the only one in the hall it happened to. He sat it again the next year, and it was the same. Then he went to the warehouse for the summer and stayed 27 years. It came back? No, he said. It never came back. Then, the family withdrew it, they said. Her grandmother wanted a quiet life, and I was 17, and everybody in that room was older than me and better dressed. I asked him to come to the national round. No. It's one day, no, he said, and got up and put the certificate back in the plastic sleeve, carefully, all 5 in order, which told me more than anything he'd said out loud. I'll not sit in a hall and watch it happen twice. That's where we left it. He kept the box in his room after that instead of the cage. I didn't ask him again, not once, and I want that clear. Because later people said I'd worked on him, and I hadn't. I'd given up on him the way you give up on a thing that's been decided for 27 years. The last thing he said that night, from the doorway, with the sleeve under his arm, "When you're up there, if you get up there," he was looking at the crack in the wardrobe panel. "Don't look at the men, they'll do a face. Look at the board." The disciplinary hearing was on the 9th of April, 11 days before the national round. They didn't call it that. The letter said a meeting regarding academic integrity, and the letter went to my mother, who was by then unemployed and had spent 2 weeks on the phone to a district office that transferred her 4 times. The charge was that I had obtained the March mock paper in advance. The evidence laid out on the table in the meeting room by Cho Gansok in a voice of deep regret, in front of the principal, the year head, and Mr. Han, 1. A student whose recorded average across 22 assessments was 61 had scored 74 with no incorrect answers. 2. That same student was, at the time, attending remedial first-year numeracy, having been unable to complete a linear equation at the board in front of a class. 3. That same student had recently begun spending unsupervised time in the annex with a member of staff who had a documented history of grievance against the school and who had access to the copier. He was good. I'd never watched him work on adults before, and it was genuinely impressive. He never once said I'd cheated. He said he was troubled, and he said Ms. Bay's name with sympathy, and he used the word irregular 4 times. The proposed outcome was withdrawal of my exam candidacy pending review, plus a note on my file. Everyone in that room knew what pending review means 11 days out. Ms. Bay was called in at 20 past. She'd come with a folder, and she'd told me in the corridor beforehand, flatly, that the folder would not save me, because everything in it was a copy and every copy had gone through her hands, and that was the whole problem. She said her piece anyway. The 61s, the bar 7s, 22 assessments in a 9-mark band. The principal listened to all of it and then asked her in a kind voice whether she had ever, at any point in the last 4 years, seen a student hand a completed paper to Cho Hanel. No, she said. Has anyone? And that's when the door went. And the secretary said there was a student outside who wished to make a statement, and Seo Hae-yoon came in. She had her bag against her chest, the way she'd stood at the corridor window in February. I hadn't asked her. I want that recorded. I'd thought about it for 3 days and decided against it, because I had already worked out what it would cost her, and I had also worked out that her testimony was worth roughly 1 hour of a lawyer's afternoon. And, this is the honest part, I had decided her seat at a university was worth more to the world than my seat at an exam. She'd heard about the hearing from Yuna, who'd heard from her mother, who was on the parents' committee. She stood at the end of the table and told them she had personally removed a completed mock paper from the bin outside room 302 in December, that it carried Cho Hanel's header and 38 problems in my handwriting, and that she had watched him throw it away. The principal asked whether she still had it. Yes. Where? Not in this building, said Seo Hae-yoon. Then Cho Gansok asked her, with enormous gentleness, whether it was true that she had written a letter to Kim Ujin in November, declaring romantic feelings, and whether it was true that this letter had been read aloud in the third-floor corridor, and whether she had subsequently been excluded from her friendship group. The room changed temperature. Mr. Han looked at the table. Yes, she said. So you would accept that you are not a neutral party here? No, I'd accept I'm a mean one. She was very white, and her voice didn't move. I ran that lottery for 2 years. I wrote him a fake note and read it out at the lockers and made money on it. I'm telling you what I saw because I'm the one who did it. And there's nobody left in that class who'll say anything, because they've all worked out what happens. Nobody had a follow-up. The outcome, 3 days later, in writing, no finding of academic misconduct, no note on my file, and no reinstatement to any school-run competition program, which was fine because I wasn't in one. Seo Hae-yoon's outcome, also in writing, also 3 days later, her conduct grade for the year was lowered to C on the grounds of her own account of organized bullying, which she had provided voluntarily. A C conduct grade removes you from the early admission track. They used her confession. That's the piece of it I'd like people to hold on to. She walked into that room and made herself the only person in the building who had told the truth about the lottery, and they took the truth and priced it. I found her at the bus stop afterwards, and I had a whole thing prepared. And what came out was, you could have said you found it in the corridor. Yeah, said Seo Hae-yoon. I thought about that on the stairs. 2 things happened in the week between the hearing and the written round that I've never known where to put, so I'll put them here. The first is that Mr. Han came to the annex. He knocked, which nobody does, and stood just inside the door with his hands in his pockets while Ms. Bae marked and pretended not to be listening. And he said he wanted to say something and then took a while to say it. What he said roughly that in my first year he had noticed the 61s, that he had thought about it for a fortnight, and then decided that a boy who scores 61 is a boy who scores 61. Because the alternative required him to believe something about a colleague. That when Ms. Bae was moved to the annex, he had said nothing at the staff meeting, and that he had asked me in front of 30 people whether I'd had help with the March mock. Then he said he was sorry. I said thank you, and he stood there a moment longer to see whether anything else was coming, and nothing was, and he went. Ms. Bae said, without looking up, that took him 4 years and it cost him nothing. He's the only one who's done it. He's the only one who's done it, she agreed, and went on marking. I want to be exact about what I felt, which was almost nothing. There's a thing people expect at that point, a warmth, a small repair. What I actually thought was that Mr. Han would now feel better for the rest of his life, and that this was a service I had provided him for free, and that he'd walked out of the annex lighter than he came in. I've decided that's ungenerous, and I've decided to keep thinking it. The second thing is that Cho Hanul stopped speaking in class. Not dramatically, he answered when asked. But the Friday check never happened again after February, not once. And he stopped sitting at the front of the self-study room. And one lunchtime I came past the third-floor window, and he was on his own at the end of a bench with a paper in front of him, not working on it, just sitting with it. Yuna told somebody, that he'd had a row with his father at home about the April entry, loud enough for the neighbors in a house where nobody hears anything. And on the Thursday of that week, he did something I have never explained to anyone's satisfaction, including my own. He left a set on my desk. 20 problems, national practice. His header on the top in his own handwriting the way his father taught him at 14. And underneath the header, in the same pen, small, he'd written, don't. That's all. One word. I looked at it for the whole of first period. I still don't know which of the two possible things it meant, and I've stopped picking. Both readings fit the boy who stood at that board in April, and the difference between them is the entire difference between what he became and what he'd have been if he'd been born to somebody else. And it's not mine to settle. I put the set in my bag and took it home and did not do it. And it's in a drawer in Daejeon. The written stage of the national round is on a Saturday in a university building in Suwon, with 406 candidates in it, and Cho Hanul was in row 2. Of course he was. The school entered him in January. I was in row 19, entered independently through a regional education center, with a blank where the school name goes, which meant that when they read the roll they said my name and then nothing, and the boy next to me looked over. 3 hours, 12 problems. I had built one plan for that morning, and I'd built it in a room behind a gym, and it was this: do not use the number. Not once. Every problem from the bottom, one true step on the one below it, checked twice. In writing, the way a slow person does it. I was at 40 by then. 19 days of doubling from one gets you further than you'd think. 40 is enough to see the shape of a thing if you let it. Twice that morning it started to come. Problem 4 and then problem 9. The answer standing up out of the page and waving. And both times I put my pen down and looked at the window until it stopped, and then went back and did it from the bottom like a child. That cost me problem 12. I ran out of time with 2 lines to go, and I want to be honest that it hurt. And that I sat in a hall in Suwon at the end of 3 hours looking at 2 missing lines and thinking about how I'd have had them at 94. But the 11 I had were mine all the way down. And I could have stood up and defended any of them to anybody. Results on the Wednesday by candidate number on a wall and on a website. Cho Hanul, first in the province, 96. Kim Ujun, second in the province, 91. 12 go through to the oral. It is held in the same building, in a room with a board, in front of 3 examiners from 2 universities, and each candidate draws a sealed problem they have not seen in talks. The school put a banner up on the Thursday, real banner printed across the front railings. Congratulations, Cho Hanul, first in the province, national final. Under it, in the smaller line, where they put the rest of it, nothing about a second-place candidate, because a second-place candidate entered through Anyang, and the school cannot claim him. That evening, Cho Hanul came to find me. Not at the lockers. He came to the annex and stood in the doorway of a room with number lines taped to the wall, and he'd walked round the back of the gym to do it, which meant he'd thought about it in advance. 96, he said. I saw. You want to know how many of those I did on my own? He wasn't smiling. He looked like he hadn't slept, and I hadn't expected that at all. All of them. Everyone. I sat down and I did them, and it was the easiest thing I've ever done, and I don't know how, and I never have. I didn't say anything. You think I don't know something's wrong with it? He said. 2 years ago I couldn't do induction. Now I look at a page and it's just there. It's there before I've read it. Do you know what that's like? Yes, I said. He looked at me then, and there was a moment, maybe a second and a half, where the whole thing was on the table between us and either of us could have picked it up. My father says it's confidence, he said. Okay, he says that's what 4 years of good training does. Okay, say something else. His voice went up and he heard it and pulled it back down. You've had one word for me since I was 14. You'll get a problem you've never seen, I said. And a man will ask you why, and then he'll ask you why again. Cho Hanul stood in the doorway of the annex for a while. I'll do it the way I always do, he said. It just falls out. That's what I'm telling you. He left. I sat back down with Ms. Bay's syllabus in front of me and the strip light buzzing, and I got out the pad and I did the semicircle again from the beginning, because at that point I'd have done it in my sleep, and it still steadied me. The oral was in 11 days, and I still had nothing that would hold up in a room. No witness who wasn't compromised. No document that hadn't gone through Ms. Bay's hands, and a girl with a C on her record who had already spent everything she had. What I had was a boy who could not explain a 4th line. I had been building toward that for 4 months, and I want to say clearly because it's the last honest thing before the end, that on the 9th of April in a room behind a gym, I finally understood that it wouldn't be enough. Beating him proves I'm better. It doesn't prove he's built out of me. 12 candidates go up. Somebody wins. The banner comes down and another goes up, and the man in room 302 shakes a hand and says that's what 4 years of good training does. I needed the archive. And the archive is in Suwon, and it keeps competition scripts for 5 years, and it releases them to precisely one category of person, the candidate whose name is on the front. The provincial competition archive is in the basement of the education office in Suwon, and it keeps Olympiad scripts for 5 years, and it will release a script to the candidate whose name is on the front of it, on production of identity, for a copying fee of 501 a page. Every script from the last 4 years that matters has Cho Han-noel on the front of it. I sat in the annex on the 10th of April with that fact in the middle of the table like a dead animal. "Then it's the wrong archive, Ms. Bay said. She'd been marking. She put the pen down and went to the cupboard and came back with the 11th file, the oldest one, the gray paper. "They keep scripts 5 years, she said. "They keep entry paperwork for 20. Entry paperwork is not scripts. It's the boring layer underneath. Nomination forms, candidate lists, invigilation sheets, the receipts for the fees. Nobody has ever wanted it. It is not confidential because nobody has ever imagined a use for it. And every independent entry through a regional center carries a copy of the guardian's form. And every school nomination carries the nominating teacher's signature. 20 years of them in boxes in Suwon. We went on the Friday. The woman on the desk wanted to know my relationship to the records requested, and I said I was a candidate in the current round and I wanted my own entry file, plus the district's historic entry lists, which are public. And she said the historic ones would take an hour to bring up, and Ms. Bay said we'd wait. 25 years ago, Anyang District, regional preliminary. Nomination sheet, nominating teacher, Cho Gansok. Candidate, Cho Gansok's program, 4 names, and attached to the back. Because the district required it then and doesn't now. The invigilation register, who sat in the hall, in ink, at the door on the morning. Kim Tae-sop signed in at 8:41. He sat that exam. He physically sat in the hall at 17 and signed the register at the door. And there is no script in his name anywhere in the province. Because the paper that came out of that hall went in under somebody else's cover sheet. Ms. Bay read it twice and then went and stood in the corridor for a bit. We paid for 11 pages, 5,500 won. The rest of that week I spent on the other thing, which was the current one, and it was easier and dirtier. Independent entries, current round, Anyang Center. The file has my form in it, with the school box blank and my father's 2 strokes and hook. School nominations, current round, Taryong High. 1 candidate, Cho Han-noel, nominated by Cho Gansok, with the supporting evidence attached as required by the district, which is the candidate's 3 strongest recent scripts. Photocopies of them. Stapled in the file. Public paperwork, because supporting evidence for a nomination is administrative, not academic. 38 problems in my handwriting with his header on top. Provincial selection, January. And behind it, the December mock, and behind that, the entry paper from February, the flawless one, the one that took me from 1 to 0. I stood in a basement in Suwon holding photocopies that the vice principal of my school had personally submitted to the district in support of his own son. He'd had to. That's the thing. 4 years of taking my work and putting his son's name on it. And at the very end, the system asked him to prove the boy was worth entering. And the only proof he had was me. I paid the copying fee. On the bus back, Ms. Bay asked what I was going to do with it, and I said I didn't know yet, which was a lie, and she looked out of the window and let me have it. I did know. I'd known since February, and I'd been afraid of it since February, because handing that folder to the district on the 12th of April gets you an investigation that takes 8 months, and a boy who is by then in the army or in a factory, in a school that closes ranks, and a man who has done this once before and got out clean when the family withdrew it. Paper goes in a drawer. A drawer has a man standing in it. The oral is on the 20th, in front of 3 examiners and an audience. And there is no drawer in that room. 9 days out, I put the whole thing on the annex desk and we built the order of operations. And Ms. Bay argued with me for 2 hours about the only part that mattered. Her position, send it to the district on Monday. All 11 pages plus the nomination file, registered post, copies to the provincial office and to the paper that ran the photograph. Mine, the 20th. You want an audience, she said. Yes, say it properly. Not the audience for you. You want them to watch him fail. Yes, she sat back and folded her arms, and I got what I'd earned, which is that a woman who has spent 4 years and 42,000, won a month on this said, then you're not doing it for your mother, so stop saying you are. I've thought about that a lot since. Plan was 3 moves, and I'll set them out flat because they worked, and it took me 1 afternoon, and it should have taken me 4 years. 1. Registered post to the district office and the provincial education board on the 18th, time to be delivered on the 19th. 11 pages of 25-year-old entry paperwork with the invigilation register on top. Nothing about me at all. No accusation, no covering letter beyond a request that the district confirm whether a script exists for candidate Kim Tae-sop, registered 0841. I wanted a file open with a date on it before anything happened in that hall, because a file with a date on it cannot be started later by a man in room 302 and steered. 2. The nomination folder, the photocopies of my handwriting under Cho Han-noel's header, submitted by his father in support of his entry, went nowhere. It stayed in my bag. That is the piece I would produce only if someone in that room asked a specific question, because paper produced by a candidate about a rival looks like exactly what it is, unless somebody has already asked. 3. Nothing else. No leaflets, no letters to the class, no message to the newspaper, no announcement. Because the only thing that cannot be filed, dismissed, or reviewed for 8 months is a boy at a board being asked why and not knowing. Ms. Bay's part was 1 sentence long, and she hated it. On the 20th, she was to sit in the audience with the storage unit files in a bag on her lap and do nothing at all unless a member of the panel asked whether there was any documentation. And if nobody asks, then it's the wrong day and we do the 8 months. The last thing was the problem sets, and this is the part that isn't dramatic. I did 4 hours a night for 9 nights, out loud, in an empty annex, with the door shut, talking to 13 empty desks, not solving, explaining. Ms. Bay would put a problem on the board and go and sit at the back and be a difficult man from a university. And I'd have to say every step out loud, and she'd say why whenever I skipped one. And the first night I found out I skipped roughly 1 in 4, because at 94 you don't have steps, you have jumps with decoration over them. By the 4th night I'd stopped skipping. By the 7th she stopped saying why and started saying, and if it weren't true, which is harder. And by the 9th night I could take a problem I'd never seen and stand there and build it out loud from the floor up, slowly, at the speed of a person, checking as I went. 48 by then. Doubling from 19 days, and then 9 more. I could feel the seeing coming back, and I made a decision on the 18th of April that I have never once regretted. I was going into that room and I was not going to use it. Not for one problem. Whatever they gave me, I'd walk to it. Partly because a jump can't be defended, and a staircase can. And partly, and this is the true reason, and I've only ever written it down here because I wanted to beat him with the thing he couldn't take. On the 19th, my mother ironed my shirt. She'd been out of work for 3 weeks and had started at a bakery on the Anyang Road on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And she ironed the shirt on the kitchen table with a towel under it and asked what time it started, and I told her. She said she'd try. My father said nothing at all and went to bed at 9. Seo Heian came to the annex on the 18th with 2 pieces of paper. The first was the mock from the bin outside room 302, which she'd kept somewhere that wasn't her house. And she put it on the desk and said she assumed I'd want it in the room on Saturday. I don't, actually, I said. If I produce it, it's a candidate attacking a rival. It has to come from somebody else or not at all. Then it comes from her. She looked at Ms. Bay, who nodded once and put it in the file without a word. And that was the whole handover of the single most incriminating object in this story. The second piece of paper she held onto for a bit. It was the November note. Her round pressed handwriting on one side, the sports day, the honesty, the embarrassing part. And on the back, in mine, the whole of question 4, with the substitution boxed and a bar through the 7. There's a date on it, she said. Top corner. I wrote the date on it because I wrote it in class and I date everything, which is the single most useless habit I have, and it turns out it isn't. November the 9th, which is 11 days before Cho Hanil's December mock, and about 140 days before a man in a lecture theater would ask whether anybody could establish when I had been doing work at that level. That's better than the mock, I said. I know it is. She didn't put it on the desk. She stood there with it in both hands, and I understood, about 2 seconds too late, that a thing can be evidence and also be the only object a person owns from a year of their life in which they behaved badly and then stopped. You've already given them the C, I said. Yes. You don't have to give them this. I'm not giving it to them, said Seo Heian. I'm giving it to you, and if it's needed, you can produce it. And if it isn't, I want it back on Monday. And she put it on the desk face down and left, and didn't come to the annex again. It wasn't needed. Nobody in that lecture theater ever asked a single question about dates, because the nomination file made the question unnecessary, and I carried a folded piece of paper in my inside pocket through the entire thing for nothing. I gave it back on the Monday. She checked the corner where the date was, in front of me, like a woman taking delivery, and put it in the zip pocket of her bag. The night before the oral, I didn't work. Miss Bay had taken the syllabus off me at 6 on the 18th and said that anything I learned in the last 36 hours would sit on top of the pile and fall off, which I believe is true and also believe she made up on the spot. So I walked, out past the laundromat and down to the Reservoir Road where the number 4 bus goes and back, which is about an hour and 10 minutes. Somewhere around the halfway point, I did something I'd been avoiding since December, which is think about what I actually wanted out of the next day. I want to write this down properly. It was not justice. I've heard myself described as a kid who wanted justice, and it makes me want to leave the room. The district had already had 4 reports from a woman with a storage unit, and had done nothing with any of them. And I'd read enough of the outcome letters to know that justice, in this business, is a form with a reference number that arrives in November. It was not my mother's job either, and I said that out loud to a reservoir at 9 at night, because Ms. Bay had already caught me using it as cover and I wasn't going to lie to a body of water. What I wanted was for 200 people to see it. Specifically, I wanted the school's block to watch Cho Hanul stand at a board with a correct answer he couldn't open, and I wanted his father to be standing up in the fourth row while it happened. And I wanted the exact quantity of silence in that room that had been in the corridor by the shoe lockers when I was 15 and had believed a folded piece of paper. That's not a noble sentence, and I'm not going to dress it. I'd spent 4 months building something that had at its center a boy being humiliated in public, and I had chosen that over 8 months of paperwork with better odds, because paperwork doesn't make a sound. I got home at 10:30. My father was in the kitchen with the radio off and a mug of something, and he asked where I'd been, and I said walking, and he said right. Then he said, "What happens if you lose?" "Then I've got a district file open in 8 months. He turned the mug round on the table. "And if you win, then they still might do nothing." "Right," he said. I went to bed. Through the wall, I could hear him not going to bed for about another hour and a half. And at some point, the fridge went. And at some point, he moved a chair. And in the morning, his boots were by the door and his work coat wasn't on the hook. And I assumed he'd gone in early and got the 6:20 to the warehouse like every other day of his life. He'd got the 9:40 to Suwon. On the train, Miss Bay had the files in a supermarket bag because her own bag wasn't big enough. And she read a book she wasn't reading, and about 10 minutes out of Suwon, she said, "If they don't ask, we go to the district on Monday, and it takes a year and it probably works." "It probably works." "It probably does," she said. "I want you to hear me say that out loud once so that whatever happens in that room, neither of us gets to pretend afterwards there wasn't another way." Then she went back to the book. The oral final of the national round is held in a lecture theater with a proper board, 3 examiners at a table on the floor, and about 200 seats behind them, which is where the schools sit. 12 candidates. Drawn order. Each one goes to the board, opens a sealed envelope in front of the room, and has 15 minutes. Haryong High sent a bus. The banner people, the principal, 20-odd students, and Cho Gansok in the aisle seat of the 4th row, with his hand raised at people he knew. I came on the train with Ms. Bay and sat in the candidates' block at the front and did not look behind me until the 4th candidate when I did once. My mother was standing at the back by the doors in her coat, with a bakery bag she hadn't had time to put down. She'd come off a Tuesday shift and got 2 buses. Next to her, 4 seats along on the end of the last row, Seo Haein. I looked at the board. Cho Hanel drew 9th. I drew 11th. The first 8 were the first 8. A girl from Suwon Science did something with a graph that made one of the examiners take his glasses off. A boy from Yongin froze for 2 minutes and got a question broken into 3 smaller ones and got there, and the room applauded him harder than the girl. Which tells you what people are actually watching for, and this is the part that isn't fair, and I've decided not to soften it. Cho Hanil was good. He went up, opened the envelope, read it, and started talking within 10 seconds. A combinatorics problem with a counting trap in it. He had the answer. He had it. I could see him have it. That thing where the whole shape arrives before the reading is finished. And I know exactly what that looks like from the inside. He wrote the answer on the board. Then the middle examiner, a man from the university in Daejeon with a pen he clicked, asked him how he'd got the 3rd line. "You subtract the overcounted cases," Hanuel said. "Which cases?" "The ones you've counted twice." "Show me one." And Cho Hanil stood at a board in front of 200 people, holding a correct answer he could not open. He tried. I want that recorded because everybody afterwards said he collapsed and he didn't. He fought it for a long time. He wrote a set out. He crossed it out. He said the phrase, "It just falls out," and the man from Daejeon said, "It doesn't fall out, it's built. Build it." 4 minutes. Then 5. Somebody in the school's block coughed. That's the noise that finishes a person at a board. At about 7 minutes, without turning round, Cho Hanel said, "I've seen this before." The examiner on the left asked where, in a set, in January. He was talking to the board. There was a set in January with this in it, and I know the shape of it. Whose set? And he stopped. He stood there with the chalk, and I could see his shoulders and nothing else, and the room was completely quiet, and the man from Daejeon clicked his pen once. "Do you want to finish?" the middle examiner said, not unkindly. "You can stop. It's allowed." "Yes," said Cho Hanel. "I'll stop." He put the chalk down and went back to his seat in the candidate's block, 3 along from me, and sat with his hands flat on his knees looking at the floor. And his father was standing up in the 4th row. Number 10 went. I don't remember anything about number 10. Then they read my name, and there was a small confused pause, because after it they had to say the entering body, and the entering body was a regional education center above a driving school in Anyang. And 200 people in a lecture theater heard a candidate announced with no school attached to him. I opened the envelope at the board. It was a geometry problem. Circle, 2 chords, a tangent. Prove that 3 points are collinear. The sort of thing that has one honest route and about 4 clever ones. And it started to come. Standing there with the paper in my hand, 48 in front of my face. The shape stood up and waved at me the way it used to. I put the paper down on the ledge and picked up the chalk and did not take it. I built it from the bottom. Radii are equal because that's what a radius is. Isosceles from that. Angles from that. The tangent condition, stated, and then used, and then stated again because I'd used it twice and needed it clean. Every step out loud, every step standing on the one below it. At the 5th line, the man from Daejeon said, "Why can you assume that?" "I can't. I'll prove it." And I proved it, which took 90 seconds and 3 extra lines and made the board ugly. At the 9th line, the examiner on the left said, "There's a shorter way." "Yes," I said. "There's a shorter way through the inversion. I'm not going to use it." "Why not?" I had not planned an answer to that. I've replayed it since, and I don't think there was a good one available. "Because I'd have to ask you to believe me," I said. He wrote something down. It took me 13 minutes and 40 seconds, and I finished with a board so full I'd had to rub out my own working. From the top left corner, and the 3 points were collinear, and I put the chalk down. The middle examiner asked me to wait. He looked at the sheet in front of him for a while, and then at the other 2. And then he asked, in a completely level administrative voice, the question that everything since December had been arranged to make possible, Candidate 11. "Your entry lists no school. You've been in the provincial band for 4 years according to your school records, and you've never appeared in this competition. Can you account for that?" 200 people. Cho Gansok was standing at the end of the 4th row. He'd been standing for a while. "There's a member of staff in the audience with the documentation," I said. "Bae Swayon, Taeyong Hai." Ms. Bae stood up with the bag on her arm. What happened over the next 40 minutes is in the record of the provincial board, and I'm not going to reconstruct all of it. Partly because I was sitting down by then with my hands shaking, and partly because it was, in the end, admin. She gave them the 11 files, 22 assessments in a 9-mark band, the Barsivans, and she gave them the nomination folder from the basement in Suwon, the supporting evidence Cho Gansok had submitted, in his own hand with his own signature on the cover, containing photocopies of 3 scripts in my handwriting under his son's header. The middle examiner read the cover sheet, and then the first script, and then he asked Cho Haneul, from the floor without standing up, whether he had written the January selection paper. And Cho Haneul, from the candidates block, 3 seats along from me, said, "No." His father said his name. He said it again, louder. "No, I didn't write it." Then the last thing, which was Ms. Bae putting the gray paper on the table. An invigilation register from 25 years ago with a boy signed in at 0841 and no script anywhere in the province to go with him, and a nomination sheet above it with a young teacher's signature on the line. The middle examiner asked whose name that was. "Kim Taesop," said Ms. Bae, the candidate's father, and a man at the back of the lecture theater, standing by the doors next to a woman with a bakery bag, where he had been for about an hour and a half without either of us knowing, said, "That's me." The 40 minutes after Miss Bae stood up were the least dramatic 40 minutes of the whole business, and I've come to think that's the most important thing I can tell anybody about how this ends. Nobody shouted. The middle examiner did not deliver a speech. There was no moment where the room turned on Cho Gansok, because 200 people in a lecture theater do not turn on anybody. They sit very still and look at the floor and want to leave. What happened was that a man from a university in Daejeon read a cover sheet, asked 4 questions, and wrote things down. Question 1 to Ms. Bae, is this the original nomination file or a copy? Copy obtained from the district archive with the fee receipt attached. Question 2 to the examiner on his left, quietly off mic, whether the panel had authority here at all. The answer, which I couldn't hear and got later, was no. A competition panel adjudicates a competition. What they had authority to do was void an entry and refer. Question 3 to Cho Haneul, did you write the January selection paper? Question 4 to Cho Gansok, who by then had come down to the front and was standing at the end of the examiner's table with his hand resting on it. Sir, are you the nominating teacher on this cover sheet? And Cho Gansok said, I'd like to speak to my son. That's it. That's the whole confrontation. I'd imagined about 9 versions of that moment over 4 months, and in every one of them he denied it, and in none of them did he say that. They referred it. The word they used was refer. The competition voided 1 entry pending district review and continued with 11 candidates. And the paperwork went into an envelope, and the envelope went into a bag, and a woman from the education office wrote a time on it. The one thing that was not administrative happened at the doors on the way out. The school's block emptied first, because they had a bus. Cho Gansok came up the aisle with his son a step behind him, and the principal a step behind that. And my mother was standing at the doors with her coat over her arm and the bakery bag still in her hand, because there hadn't been anywhere to put it down for 2 hours. He stopped in front of her. He was going to say something. The whole face was already doing it. The warm one, the one that works on parents, and I watched it start. My mother said, 15 years. That's all she said. 2 words in a doorway to a man in a suit, and then she stepped aside to let him past, which is the part that finished him. Because he had to walk through a door a woman in a coat was holding open. Outside, there were pigeons and a coach and the banner already down off the railings at a school 40 minutes away. And my father was standing by the bus stop with his cap in his hands, and none of us had anything to say for about a minute and a half. Then he said, "You should eat something." We got the train back together, the 4 of us, and Ms. Bay fell asleep against the window somewhere past Byongjom with a supermarket bag full of 11 years of photocopies on her lap. He'd taken the day off the warehouse and got the 940 and stood at the back for the whole thing, and had not intended to say a word. And I know that because he told me on the platform afterwards, angrily, as if I'd made him. They took his details. They asked him to attend a hearing in June. He said, all right, and then, to the examiner, with his cap in his hands, the only sentence he offered them. There's a script somewhere with my writing in it and somebody else's name on the front, and I've thought about it every day for 26 years, and I'd like it back. The results were read out an hour later, because the competition still had to happen, which nobody in that room had considered. First, in the national round, the girl from Suwon Science, and she'd earned it. And she's now doing something at a university in Pohang that I don't understand. Second, candidate 11, entered independently through the Anyang Regional Education Center. The prize is 2 things. There's money, 6 million won, which is more than my mother earned in a year at Station 2. And there's the placement, which is a summer at the Mathematics Institute attached to the university in Daejeon, which is the part that actually mattered and which I would have taken over the money without thinking about it for a second. Cho Hanol withdrew from the competition record not that day. His entry was voided in June after the district investigation, along with the 2 regionals and the provincial selection, and the school took the banner down before the end of April because the principal is not a stupid man. Cho Gansuk resigned in September before the disciplinary concluded, which means it never concluded, which means he was not found to have done anything at all. He's in a private academy in another province now. I looked him up once, in my first year at Daejeon, and then didn't again. That's the part I'd change if I could change one thing. Not the 4 years. That Ms. Bay got the 3rd-year classroom back in March of the following year, 13 months after all of this, when a post came up in the ordinary way. She still has Unit 114 off the Anyang Road. She told me she keeps it for the crockery. My mother left the bakery in the autumn and works in a hospital canteen now, where nobody's son is enrolled and nobody's schedule is a message. She has never once said sorry about the frame, and I have never once wanted her to. What she did do, the week the money came through, was open a bank book in my name and put 5 million of it in and hand me the passbook and say, "That's not mine, and it's not his." Seo Hayan did not get the early admission. She sat the ordinary exam that November with the C on her file and went to a university in Daegu on the ordinary track a year later than the people she'd sat with at the bus stop. We're not together. I've been asked that more than once, and the answer is no, and it isn't a sad one. It's just true. We text about 4 times a year. She's the only person who calls the whole thing your maths business, which I think is meant to be dismissive and has become the phrase I like best. My father sat his hearing in June and gave his account, and the board accepted it and issued a finding. And there is now a line in a provincial file that says a candidate's work was submitted under another name in the spring of that year. He did not get his script back. It doesn't exist. Scripts are kept 5 years. He knows that. He goes on asking. There's a letter every few months, and there is never anything at the other end of it. And he keeps the certificates in the plastic sleeve in his room, all 5 in order. Here's the last thing. In August, before I went to Daejeon, he came into the kitchen while I was working, and stood there for a bit, and then sat down opposite and turned the pad round to face him. It was a first-year proof. The angle in a semicircle. I'd been doing it to steady myself because I still do, and I always will. He read it. Then he picked up the pencil and did the first 2 steps, radii, equal isosceles, and got to the 3rd one and sat there. He sat there for a long time. Long enough that I could have said it. I know the answer to that step better than I know my own address, and I have never in my life wanted to give anybody anything the way I wanted to give him that line. I got up and put the kettle on and stood at the sink with my back to him. The number was still there, in front of my face, where it has been since December. It hasn't moved in months. Not up, not down, whatever I do. I've stopped testing it. Behind me, the pencil started again.